Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome to a look at what are, in my opinion, 5 of the best Atari 8-bit games. I'm not normally one for doing top 5s and lists and such like, but people have asked me about this specific topic so many times at this point that I figured I might as well give it a go. You'll note that I'm specifically not calling this my top 5 Atari 8-bit games, because I've played and loved so many games over the years that I genuinely don't think I can narrow things down enough to do a ranked top 5. As such, this is simply 5 games that, at the time I prepared this video, immediately sprang to mind as some all-time favourites. And thus, this is a topic we'll probably return to at some point in the future. With all that in mind, let's begin. Whenever I think, what are the best Atari 8-bit games, one of the first ones that pops into my mind is Datasoft's Bruce Lee, programmed by Ron J. Fortier. When I originally played this back in the day, I didn't really know who Bruce Lee was, and I must confess I've still never actually seen a Bruce Lee movie. I think it's testament to the quality of this game that I've never felt like I needed that knowledge to understand and love what it's doing. Combining precise platforming with puzzle solving and very early beat-em-up style combat, Bruce Lee is a game that I come back to time and time again, and one that I suspect I will never ever tire of. While Lucasfilm's Rescue on Fractalus came out on other platforms, for me it will always be associated with the Atari 8-bit. That's where it was first released after all. My first encounter with Rescue on Fractalus actually wasn't with the final version of the game. Instead, it was with the prototype version called Behind Jaggy Lines, which my family had acquired via the software exchanges that happened regularly at the local computer club. Supposedly, the original name, Behind Jaggy Lines, was a reference to the fact that the lack of anti-aliasing on the low-resolution visuals meant that any diagonal lines were very jaggy. Unfolding from a spectacular first-person perspective cockpit view, Rescue on Fractalus challenges you to rescue downed pilots from an incredibly inhospitable planet surface, all rendered using impressive fractal technology to simulate movement in a 3D environment. Beautifully presented, enormously atmospheric and still great fun to this day, Rescue on Fractalus will never stop making me proud to be an Atari owner from back in the day. Successfully blending multiple smaller minigames that by themselves would have been relatively unremarkable, Atari's Final Legacy is a vastly underappreciated title from the early days of the Atari 8-bit that I've always loved. Final Legacy is one of the few games from this era that was genuinely exclusive to the Atari 8-bit, though it was originally planned to also launch on the closely related Atari 5200 console. Offering a compelling blend of real-time strategy and panic-inducing action, all presented using evocative futuristic visuals, Final Legacy is not only a highly enjoyable game from the Atari 8-bit's library, but it's also an interesting time capsule. When it was originally developed, the Cold War was still in full effect, and paranoia over potential nuclear Armageddon was at an all-time high. I'm not entirely sure how helpful the more terrified members of society would have found a game that, on its higher difficulty levels, demonstrated just how futile it was to fight back against an incoming apocalypse, but as a kid I just like firing the big lasers and making things go boom. Actually, I still do. It distracts from the depressing reality of life in the 21st century, if nothing else. Carol Shaw's classic vertical scroller River Raid was probably one of the first video games I ever played, and I knew even back then that this was a really good game. In fact, I've only come to appreciate it more in recent years, as I learned exactly what an amazing technical accomplishment this game was. Jammed into just 4K for its original Atari 2600 release, Shaw made the smart move of not predefining the scenery and enemy positions, instead building a procedural generation engine that would effectively build the game as the player proceeded through it. In contrast to today's procedurally generated games though, River Raid always uses the same seed, meaning that it's the same each time you play. The result was a game that Shaw could squish into an obscenely tiny amount of space, but which you could still learn over time and master. The Atari 8-bit version for me is superior to the 2600 original thanks to the addition of a few extra elements and its slightly improved visuals. It's a brilliant game whatever you play it on though. It would be remiss of me not to mention a game that exists at least partially because of me, and that is Return of the Fungi, the third and final instalment in the Digger Dan trilogy by Simon Hunt. For those who missed this story first time around, I previously covered Hunt's excellent Atari 8-bit games Diamonds and Dan Strikes Back on the Atari A to Z series, and while researching the background of these titles, discovered that Hunt had originally planned a trilogy of games with their names loosely inspired by the original 3 Star Wars movies. I made an offhand joke in one of my videos challenging someone from the community to see if they could finish off the Digger Dan trilogy once and for all with some interpretation of the title Return of the Fungi. And I was very surprised when the one person who responded to the challenge was none other than Simon Hunt himself. I was even more surprised when he followed through on his acceptance of my challenge by creating a complete game that was excellent and highly enjoyable, and touched that he deliberately included a number of elements in the game that I specifically highlighted in other videos as things that I liked. Even were it not for my personal connection to Return of the Fungi, it'd still be one of my favourite Atari 8-bit games, and that's the main reason it's on this list. And so there you have it, 5 of the best Atari 8-bit games according to me. Like I say, there are loads of other Atari 8-bit games that I could have picked for this list, so we'll almost certainly return to this topic at some point in the future. In the meantime, feel free to share some of your own favourites down in the comments, and for now I'll just say as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.